Further on, I'm going to invite on stage a product management with over 18 years of experience in building leading tech products. He's the co-founder of the ProductTank community. He's organizing Mind the Product conference that all the product people have heard about by now. And I'm happy to have with us today in Bucharest, Martin Eriksson.
Thanks so much. Thank you, everyone. It's awesome to be here and talk about product. I usually listen to product talks, so it's kind of cool to get that together and start talking about it. So I'm here to talk about questioning the status quo. And for me, this is a great way to think about building better products, but also building better businesses. So who am I? Irina gave you a little bit of an introduction. I've been doing product management for about 18 years now and startups in Sweden and the UK. I've been a mentor at SeedCamp for many years. I'm currently an advisor to a number of startups in the UK as well. But I'm best known for having started Mind the Product, which, as she mentioned, started as a meetup group, ProductTank, which we have one here in Bucharest, run by Bulent, sitting down here, and 40 other cities around the world. And then we have Mind the Product, the blog, which is full of great content and videos from all of our talks, and a conference which we run twice a year in London and San Francisco. So what is the status quo? For those of us who have forgotten our Latin lessons, it's basically the state of things as they are. So the state in which. And it's that kind of stasis, that inertia that we all get into with our products, that we are all trying to combat with our new startups. And as Seth Godin said, you're either defending the status quo or you're inventing the future. So how do you question the status quo? Because this is how you reach product breakthroughs. And it's a question all of you have asked yourselves out there when you're building a product, when you're starting a company, when you're building a new startup. There must be a better way to do this. It's a frustration that you've met, something that's gone wrong for you, and you go, screw this, there's a better way to do this. So how do we actually do it? First up, question the problem. I think as Ediel said, I really think it's about focusing on the problem, not the solution, and falling in love with the problem, not falling in love with the solution. Henry Ford famously said that if he'd asked people what they wanted, they would have said faster horses. Sadly, he never actually said that, but it's still a good quote, and it still kind of underlines how you should be thinking about your products. Because if you ask your users what you wanted, they would have said things like faster horses, want to clean up the shit in the streets, because yes, there are about 1,200 metric tons of horse manure that New York City alone had to clean up every day. And they would have said, I want less dead horses, because there were more horse-related traffic deaths than there were today with cars. But if you flip the question around, the problem with posing it this way is that you're limited to a very specific solution set. You want faster horses, someone wants to try a breed of faster horse. You want to clean up the shit in the streets, maybe we'll design a bigger shovel and sell that to the city. You want less dead horses, maybe we need to give you more veterinarians. You kind of limit your solution set by thinking this narrowly. And obviously that's not what we want to do. That's not thinking about the big picture. So if you refocus it on thinking about the problem, those same issues come out in much starker light. So it's about getting from A to B faster. It's about horses basically shit too much, and that they're unsafe. So your possible solution space opens up a lot more, and you can start inventing things like cars, trains, planes that can get around those problems. Albert Einstein, always a good one to quote, famously said that if he had an hour to solve a problem, he would spend the first 55 minutes framing the question. Because by framing the question properly, he could easily solve the problem in just 5 minutes. So one of those good questions to ask is why. It's a really, really powerful tool that you can use when you're having these conversations with users or internally about why you're building the product you want to build. So say someone comes to you and asks you to build a bridge. Well, why do you need the bridge? So I can get across the river. Well, okay, so suddenly our solution space opens up again, right? Suddenly we can talk about maybe building a tunnel, or just building a ferry, or just put them in a canoe and row them across. You have a lot of other ways to solve the problem that might be easier, might be faster, might be more valuable. And you can keep going down the layers by asking why again, and you can find out that that's because the person works there. Well, maybe we should move the office this side, or move his house over there. And there are, again, other ways to solve the problem. And this brings up questioning the impact. So that kind of thinking around solution sets veils you into thinking about kind of 10% improvements. But I think we should be thinking about 10x improvements. We need to be thinking about order of magnitude changes that really solve customer problems in a whole new way. My friend Alon, who's the VP of Product and Growth at TransferWise, has said that to achieve advocacy, your product needs to be an order of magnitude better than the current solution. So if you think about it, these guys do currency transfers. If you were 10% better, so you charge 4.8% instead of 5% to do a currency transfer, you're not going to go down to the bar and tell your friends about it and tweet about it and be excited about it, because that's not that much better. It's obviously a better product, but it's not going to get you excited. If you slash it to 0.5%, suddenly that's game changing. Suddenly you save a lot more on every time you're moving money around. So it's this 10x thinking that I think all of us need to be thinking about when we're building products. Because 10% means existing tools and assumptions. It means tweaking what's already there. It means those small little improvements like building a better shovel. It doesn't let you think about the bigger picture. There's a great video, I'm going to show you a short clip of it, by Charles and Ray Eames, which was filmed in the 70s, and it's basically about the power of 10, the power of adding an additional zero. So every 10 seconds, this video zooms out a power of 10 in square meters. And you can see how quickly that kind of exponential thinking opens up new possibilities, opens up new worlds. It highlights that power of adding a zero and of reaching for greater impact. And it's a really simple technique, although it sounds silly, just add some zeros. And this is the philosophy behind Google X as well. So the captain of moonshots, which is the best title ever, at Google X has said that it's often easier to make something 10x better than it is to make something 10% better. And I agree with that, because changing the question forces you to change your assumptions and forces you to think about a bigger and better solution to the problem than just that 10% improvement. This runs throughout Google, so I have to quote them again. Larry Page has also said that incremental improvement is guaranteed to be obsolete over time. And this is why you see so many companies churning out of the S&P 500 or the big company leagues, because they're so focused on that 10% improvement that they build themselves into obsolescence and they lose out on where they are. So, also question the solution. So you have this great problem set and you're coming up with solutions. What are you going to focus on? I think so many startups come out, sadly, and try to be a little bit of everything and a little bit to everyone. I think a lot of people talk about this, obviously, but WhatsApp is probably most famous for this, about doing one thing and one thing well. WhatsApp is a multi-billion-dollar company at this point. All they do is messaging. Google launched just as a search engine. That's all they did, but they were 10x better than what was there previously, probably 100x. Amazon was just a bookstore. All of these amazing building corporations that we see now started with one great idea, executing it really well, and going for that moonshot, going for 10x better than what was currently out there. Question your competition, because it's not usually who you think it is. If you're building any of these apps, so ticketing systems, budget apps, finance apps, reporting apps, product management apps, there's a lot of tools like this out there now, and more coming every day. And your real competition isn't actually other ticketing systems or other budget apps, it's actually Excel. Because your user today is using Microsoft Excel to do this task. And unless, again, you're 10x better what they're using today, they're not going to switch, because guess what? They already have Excel, they already have a process that works, they already have all these beautiful reports, and they have everything they need, so that switching cost is really high. And that inertia is something that you have to think about when you're building products. I also think we need to think about this internally. So a lot of the time, you've probably heard some of these ideas before. They're often focused externally, right? So questioning your customer, questioning your product, questioning your market. But you also have to bring that thinking internally. You have to think about your process and your hierarchy, as I'm going to talk about. There's this kind of pervasive myth of the hero founder, or the hero designer, or the hero product manager. That's just not true. In any great organization that does great design, even in Apple with the most famous example, it's a team sport. It's something where you can have one person that has a vision, but it requires a team to get there, and it requires lots of different inputs, requires lots of different ideas, and it requires lots of different thinking to get to that solution. And as Marty Kagan, another friend and, a bit of a hero, has said, the products today, they're not being built by some product manager in a silo. It's not an epiphany. It's just not how it works. Product, design, engineering, founders, all have to work together to build the right product. And this brings me on to the process side of things. I have a really big thing about agile versus agile, so one of them has a lowercase a, which is that we get stuck in these processes too often. We get stuck in the dogma of what agile or lean or scrum or Kanban should be, and we get into these discussions about you're not doing it right, you're not doing stories properly, you're not doing stand-ups properly, and you're kind of missing the point. I think it's really important to go back to the first principles, the original ideas behind the Agile Manifesto. So most of you have probably seen this, but you probably haven't read it in a while, you probably haven't thought about it in a while, and it's worth re-emphasizing. So first up, it's about individuals and interactions over processes and tools. It says itself really, but again, it's emphasizing those interactions and having those conversations, and not about processes, not about following the tools that you have. Working software over comprehensive documentation makes sense. Customer collaboration over contract negotiation, again, that emphasis on communication, on talking to people, and on getting different inputs versus just writing down a spec. And then finally, my favorite one is responding to change over following a plan. This is basically what every startup should be living by, because this is what is your world. You have to respond to all the inputs that come at you. You have to respond to new ideas, new problems, new solutions that come up. And this is also where I get kind of dogmatic about not following whatever your chosen methodology trademarked is, because it's about adapting to what works for you and your team. Use bits of Scrum, use bits of Kanban, use whatever it is that works for you and your team to get this job done, because that's all that matters. And I'm not the only one that thinks this. Fred Wilson at Union Square Ventures has said, lean is a state of mind. Again, not a process to be followed, it's a way to approach the world and a way to approach your business. Tom Chi, who used to be the lead UX designer at Google X, said, don't fail fast, learn fast. And this one's hugely important. A lot of companies out there talk about how they fail fast, how they want to run fast and break things, certain famous ones especially. But no failure is valuable unless you've learned something. I'm all for failing and testing stuff, but unless you have an objective learning from that failure, you've kind of lost any value from that failure. Failing for the sake of failure has no value. Another great one is Tom Loosemore at gov.uk, and this is kind of proof that you can do it in any company, because these guys have done it in the government in the UK, in that the process doesn't own us, we own the process. And he calls it agile jazz. And again, like jazz, you take the bits that work for you, you play around with it, you try other bits, and you find what works for you and your team. And that brings me on to questioning your hierarchy. Same process here, right? Questioning internally, what is actually working? Why are we trying to build 21st century, 22nd century amazing new technologies using 18th century workforce methods? Why are we trying to implement command and control, reporting, estimating, all these things that do not make sense in the current world? I believe strongly in this emerging way of thinking around autonomous teams, where you let your teams own the product. You let your teams work how they want, on what they want, as long as it's aligned with your goals. So these autonomous, independent teams focus on OKRs that solve customer problems. And like I said, it's an emerging concept that a lot of companies are following. Spotify's been pretty famous about it, Airbnb, Valve, TransferWise, but we did it back in Huddle when I was there in 2010 as well. And it's a great way to motivate your team. So let's break that down. What do we mean? By autonomous, no one tells the team what to do. There's no management team going, this is what you should build. No one tells the team how to do it. You pick your language, pick your code structure, pick your libraries. No one tells the team how to organize. Again, Scrum, Kanban, whatever you want to do, as long as you're going to get the job done. The only direction the team gets from a kind of management layer is that OKR. Independent. the team has within it every skill and every resource it needs to achieve its goal. And the team can touch any area of the product to achieve those OKRs. So as an example, again, I'll bring up TransferWise because they do a lot of good writing and talking about this. They have a currencies team, and that team's goal is to go and launch new currencies into new markets. And within that team, they don't just have the front-end developers, the back-end developers, and the product manager, but they also have the lawyers, the bankers needed to do it. And that team completely decides what currencies they should launch, when they should launch it, how they should do it, what it should look like on the site. And the same in other companies. So Spotify marketing team, for example, has the power not just to create an ad and then drive traffic to a page. They actually build a page, they build a landing page, they build the first user flow into the product to make sure that not only is it aligned with that marketing message, but you get the best possible conversion rate through to a returning customer. Again, it's that focus on OKRs, something that came out of Google, objectives and key results. Could be a whole other talk on its own, but look it up. It's about setting focused objectives for a team, and then setting the key results that are steps towards that objective. And it's, again, motivating the team to think about the big picture. And motivating the team to think about solving customer problems. Because focusing on that brings a whole team's creativity to bear. Again, it's a team sport, so it's not about an individual product manager and an individual designer coming up with this amazing product idea. It's about the product manager generally bringing a problem to the team and then having the entire team work on the best possible solution. And everybody is motivated by solving actual problems and seeing users delighted by those solutions. And finally, obviously, driving business growth is important, but that's also one of those problems you can put into that process. And so this allows you to, again, use those OKRs, but still stay really nimble and agile because each little team has the freedom to execute what they need to execute. Now, why does autonomy matter? A lot of people ask this, and it's like this utopian idea of this amazing way to build products, but it has real bottom line effects. So obviously speed is one of them. Smaller, nimble teams, we all know, can execute faster, can build things faster, can test things faster, learn faster, iterate faster. They're also much closer to the customer, so it's not about having multiple layers of learning, right? It's not like the user research team goes out and talks to somebody, they build a report, they hand it over to someone in the analytics team look at it, hand it over to the designer. All those layers are kind of removed because the team is immediately connected to the customer. Scaling. Obviously, a lot of us want the challenge of having to scale our teams. And this kind of autonomous team approach actually works really well for this because you just have to carve out new teams. And again, as a management layer, you can decide what you want to focus on by how many resources you align with each team. And motivation. I think this is one of the most important things today because inherently designers, developers, product managers, everybody that works in a startup, everybody that works on web products is a creative person. And it's hard to forget this, it's easy to forget this, sometimes, when you look at someone who's a developer who's just writing code. But that's a creative endeavor. It's a creative problem-solving endeavor, just like design is, just like product is. And I'm not, again, use quotes to underline it. Daniel Pink, and I really suggest you go read this book or watch his TED Talk if you haven't. Carrots and sticks, that command and control structure, is so last century. For today's creative knowledge worker, you need to focus on autonomy, mastery, and purpose. And the best way to do that is through these autonomous teams. You also need to question the context in which your product exists. And what do I mean by that? The best way to think about it is instead of thinking about making your product awesome, make your users awesome. So again, just a different way to think about things that opens up different solutions. And Kathy Sierra has done a couple of great talks at my conference about this, but here's a great example. So nobody wants to be an expert at your insert app name here, whether it's, in this example, an ingredient shop or recipe app. They want to cook food. And that's the context in which you exist. So if you can help your users be awesome at cooking food, they're going to love your product because you're helping them achieve the goal that they want. You're helping them be awesome in the context that they want to be awesome. So how can you do that? One of the big things I think is focusing on benefits instead of metrics. So most of us probably measure things like page views, users, clicks, conversion rates, sales. All those things are important. All those things are easy to track because they come in Google Analytics and all the other analytics tools. Some of you may be even measuring at the business level, acquisition, activation, retention, and referral revenue, the good old R metrics. And these are all important for your business, but they're not really telling you about your customer. Are you measuring the benefit that your customer is getting out of it? If you're a dating site, should you maybe be measuring the number of matches that are successful? How many dates are you producing? How many married couples are you generating? Because that's ultimately why people are using your product. And if they're achieving those goals, even if that means that they're leaving your platform, that makes you successful. It makes your product something that they want to tell their friends about. If you're a social network, are you measuring the number of meaningful interactions or messages or comments or whatever it is that you think is a meaningful interaction? Because again, that is why people are using your product. And if you're an ad-supported website, are you measuring the number of sales generated by your clients? Again, that's what your ultimate customers are using your product for. And if you're not measuring these things, you're not going to understand what you're supposed to be building. Put another way, if you measure what you value, you're going to optimize for what you need as a company. But if you measure what your customers value, you're going to build more of that. It's also worth thinking about outcomes over features. So I think Ediel was talking about this as well. It's not about focusing in on this amazing solution and putting that on the roadmap. It's about thinking about a customer outcome, or again, that customer problem. And I'll just jump quickly into one way about thinking about this. We probably all recognize this as the agile story. As a user, I want to X so that Y. The problem with this is that you're using personas, actions, and results. Your persona and action are both assumptions. You kind of don't really know. Your persona changes. I worked in fintech, for example, where in one mode of life, someone might be thinking one way about their money, and in another product, they might be thinking completely differently. So those are two different personas. How do I know which one I'm interacting with? And also, how do you know that that is the best action? Again, it focuses you in too much too quickly on a solution to the problem, instead of bringing the problem to the whole team to think about. So there are other options to this. This is the jobs to be done story. So if you go to jobstobedone.org, there's a lot of writing about this as well, but they kind of flip it around. So they think about when X, I want to Y, so I can Z. And it's flipping the question around so that you're thinking more about the situation that the user is in, the motivation the user has to be using your tool at that point, and the outcome the user wants from that interaction. And again, it's just a different way to think about it that brings context and causality to bear. I also think it's important to think about your roadmaps based on outcomes. If your roadmap looks like this, by the way, fire your product manager, because they're a project manager. Roadmaps should not have dates on them. This is another one of my bugbears. You should be thinking about what you're working on currently, has very good detail. You probably can commit to something in a couple months out to a customer or internally. And then you have the near-term bucket, things that you know you want to be working on next. And then you have the long-term thing where you have lots of great ideas, but no one's ever going to commit to them. I recently heard of a friend that joined a startup, and they wanted a 3-year roadmap. And it's just a piece of fiction. You might as well go write Moby Dick and hand it over to them, because it's just as much bearing on the company in even 6 months' time. And roadmaps should probably look something like this. There should be physical objects that you can gather around in your office. And this is where, even with outsourcing, it's important to make sure that your product manager and your dev team at least are co-located, because that high bandwidth communication needs to happen around a physical space. And again, if you think this can't be done at a startup or your company, this is the government in the UK, how they're building their website today. So they have these swim lanes. They're thinking about what the top priorities are. We can see down at the bottom right there is their kind of future bucket. And each kind of lane is very focused on a user problem, has a story behind it, and then they have these feature cards that they put on. And each team there highlights its mission and its goals and prioritizes accordingly. Obviously, I think other people have talked about this as well. You need to be thinking about data versus opinions. But this isn't an excuse to not talk to customers, because that's still data. So really it's about quantitative and qualitative data over opinions. Lots of people said this better than I can. W. Edwards Deming, famous statistician, said, "In God we trust, all others bring data." And Jim Barksdale, CEO of Netscape, said, "If you have facts, we'll use them. But if all you have is opinions, we're going to use mine." So to wrap up a little bit, change the question and change the way that you think about your product, and also how you think internally. Embrace curiosity by asking new questions, by asking why. Embrace diversity, both of people and of opinions, and question the status quo. I'm going to leave you with a little video, which some of you have probably seen, but I think it's a great way to inspire you to think about bigger ways and to think differently. It's an ad from Apple in 1997 when Steve Jobs had just come back to Apple. And this is actually the version that didn't air, where Steve Jobs himself narrates the video. So it's about a minute long, and I'll leave you with that.
Here's to the crazy ones, the misfits, the rebels, the troublemakers, the round pegs in the square holes, the ones who see things differently. They're not fond of rules, and they have no respect for the status quo. You can quote them, disagree with them, glorify or vilify them. About the only thing you can't do is ignore them, because they change things. They push the human race forward. While some may see them as the crazy ones, we see genius. Because the people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones who do.
So yeah, go forth and question the status quo. Thank you very much.
So, any questions? Yes, we do. Questions for Martin? Can they have the presentation?
Yeah, I've actually auto-tweeted it while I was on stage, so it should be on Twitter.
Any other question?
Hi, I had a question. If you're supposed to question the status quo, but then everybody knows about the trough of sorrow, the years in which a company is trying to figure out how to best build a product. During those years, how do you balance questioning the status quo with keeping focused on your initial vision until you actually make it?
I think it's a great question. I think it's about making sure that you always check back in on the status quo to make sure that you're still moving in the right direction, right? So even if it takes you several years, you're a bigger company, a hardware company is taking a long time to build a vision, just make sure that you're constantly checking in to make sure that you still head in the right direction, that no one else has come and solved the problem, or the problem's gone away, or whatever it is, so that you know that you're not wasting even more time, right? So you maybe a year or two in, and you know that it's going to take you another year or two to get there, that you know that you're still doing the right thing, basically. So I think it's just about constantly having that conversation internally. Are we doing the right thing? Are we heading in the right direction? Always questioning, is there a better way to do this? Even if you've kind of fallen in love with your own solution, you can't do that, right? You have to always question your own solution, your own idea, and just make sure that you're always pushing for the bigger picture.
Thank you. We got one more question here. Valentin?
Hi, and thank you for this wonderful presentation. I want to ask you if you can, how can you prioritize when you know your users need this kind of benefits, but how do you prioritize between them? You have some kind of algorithm or some kind of insights you can share with us?
You prioritize between the teams, or just prioritize between the problems, you mean?
Prioritize between the problems.
I think there's, again, it's just going back to that data over opinion, and it's trying to find as much data to back up how big a problem this is. And again, the problem doesn't always have to be that big picture thing that you're aiming for. It can be a little thing like, my user can't log in right now, right? That's obviously a big problem. So that becomes something that you have to bump up the queue. And just by framing it in those words, it's much easier to understand how important that problem is than if you'd written the story like, must fix the login button. You're like, I don't know, how important is that? But if you're saying my users can't log in, it's like, oh, actually, hang on a minute, that's pretty important. But again, it is coming back to that data, and there is no magical solution to this, right? It's just looking at as much data as you can. It's trying to quantify as much as possible that qualitative data that you're getting as well from your user research, and then trying to figure out the right way to prioritize that in your roadmap, and then having a good discussion about it with your team, right?
Thank you.
Hope that helps.
Thank you very much for your time here.
Thank you very much.